Republican and Democratic staffers last night to say, well, should we just ask Joe Manchin what he wants? Because it looks like Joe Manchin, Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, that moderate centrist portion of both parties could be really strongly empowered, really no matter what happens tonight. It doesn't mean that they're going to win the votes, but it does mean that Democrats would have the discussions that they want to have and have the matters come up for those votes in the first place if they could manage to pull off these 2 Senate seats. And certainly John Ossoff would probably have some staffers older than him if he manages to get up to Capitol Hill.
Patricia, Errol, thank you both very much. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, waking up to this huge news. So the GOP's futile bid to block Joe Biden's win comes to a head today. New reporting on what Vice President Pence could do before Congress this afternoon. That's next.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Hi, I'm Dan Schaefer.
There is no bad froth. Just bad people eating froth.
This morning at 9 on KSFY TV.
USAA is easy to work with and can save you money on all.
The Republicans that is objecting to this. Tell us more about that. Why did you decide to do it, and what do you want to see?
Well, the number one cause is the tremendous amount of allegations of fraud throughout the country, not only in Georgia, but several other states. And the one sacred trust that we have in this country is the ballot box. That is the place where people go to voice their opinion, their desire for the direction of our country and those who will represent them. And when that ballot box and the trust of the security of that ballot box is in question, it is incumbent, it's the duty of elected officials to stand up and to defend that right. And unfortunately, we've had many states where that has not taken place in a manner that it should have, and this is kind of the last place that it comes. And so Congress has a role to stand up and question some of the electoral votes that have come in from the various states, Georgia included, and I'm honored to be a part of that, to stand up for the sacredness of the ballot box.
All right. Congressman, Mr. Heiss, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Straight ahead, Florida's GOP governor going viral for rebuking a CNN reporter. Media opinion columnist Joe Concha says the question was never about informing the public. See the heated exchange right after the break.
The ups and downs of frequent mood swings can take you to deep depressive lows, or give you unusually high energy, even when depressed. Overwhelmed by bipolar 1? Ask about Vraylar.
Again, we talked about the New South in the 1970s, but the South really is looking especially new in 2020 with the state of Georgia going dark blue in the presidential race, and now it looks like doing the same in these 2 Senate races.
I think you're absolutely right to raise it that way, because we're talking about only in a short period of time, maybe 2 or 3 decades, to see a black minister who pastors Martin Luther King's church, who is buried right across the street from the church. John Lewis buried in this Reverend Warnock was John Lewis's pastor. There's a reason Dr. King and John Lewis and Hosea Williams became central figures in the movement of civil rights and voting rights, because they came from Georgia, where Georgia was the epic center of this. It was Lester-Maddox. It was the symbol of where blacks were treated less than human, had to sit in back of buses and the whole 9 yards. To see that election last night, and as I said, it looks like trending that a Jewish American will also win the other side. That black-Jewish coalition that Dr. King and Rabbi Abraham Heschel had is now going to the U.S. Senate and is going to deal with things like police reform and voting rights and other things that Donald Trump tried to stand in the way of. So it goes to a song you and I learned in church growing up as Baptists: weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Well, this morning or morning, joy is coming.
There's going to be a lot of preaching this morning.
I think so. Hey, just one last note, as you guys were talking, Joe, about the impact of Donald Trump and his coming into the state and the phone call he made on Saturday to the Secretary of State, Gabriel Sterling, who's the elections official we've all come to know, who's been out front and center, a Republican again, who said he would have preferred Republicans win these races. He said yesterday in an interview, looking at the prospect of losing these 2 seats and turning over control of the Senate to the Democrats, he said it falls squarely on the shoulders of President Trump and his actions since November 3rd. When you tell people your vote doesn't count and it's been stolen and people start to believe that, you go to 2 senators and ask the Secretary of State to resign and trigger a civil war in the Republican Party when we need to unite, he said. All of this stems from the president's decision since November 3rd. Again, that's from the Republican election official in Georgia.
And Willie, all
300 purchase allowance on
stretch out over the course of many, many hours, but in the end will do absolutely nothing to change the results of Joe Biden's win. Now, this all gets underway at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and that is where we will see Vice President Mike Pence in his ceremonial role presiding over the Senate come forward in front of the joint session of Congress. And this today puts him in such an awkward spot. He is under intense pressure from President Trump to attempt to overturn the results of the election, to defy his only ceremonial role today. President Trump tweeting in part, quote, "If Vice President Pence comes through for us, we will win the presidency." That is a statement which, of course, is untrue, and sources have told CNN that Vice President Pence has sat down with President Trump and told him that he does not have the power to overturn their loss. Now, today what we will see is Republicans standing up and objecting to at least 3 states. We know Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania will be objected to by a member in the House and the Senate, which is important. And this is where the process will get slowed down significantly. For every state that is objected to, both chambers have to recess. They have to debate this for 2 hours. Then they have to vote again. Again, nothing that will change the outcome. It just slows down everything today. And there is, of course, the specter that more states will be added into this. So we're looking at a very, very, very long day up here on Capitol Hill, John. And again, to be noted, this is something that is very ceremonial, very routine, that Congress does all the time once there is a new president, but today is really getting gummed up in the theatrics of this political moment. John?
Theatrics of Republicans trying to overthrow an election. Sunless Rafati on Capitol Hill. Please keep us posted. Joining us now, CNN political commentator and former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent. Also with us, CNN political analyst David Gregory. David, the Georgia implosion. Look what you get when you do Donald Trump's bidding. That is what Republicans are waking up to in Georgia this morning. So, if, you're headed to Capitol Hill to watch the electoral vote counted today, and you're one of these Republican members of Congress, how might that change your calculation?
Well, you got to be confused about what the impact of Donald Trump is at this point. I think there was the calculation that no one wanted to cross Trump, not just because he was still in office, but because he represented the driving force of this new Republican Party. And so the Josh Hawleys, who's highly educated and yet doesn't think very straight, who probably wants to be president and thinks he has to go through Donald Trump, even out of office, to do that. Mike Pence, who in all of this time in Washington is apparently still having to study to understand that he as vice president can't gum up works for a president who wants to steal the election. So I don't know what the impact is. I think the commitment has been made by those who want to ride with Trump into the sunset. But what Georgia tells us is that a voter suppression effort on the part of the President of the United States is not a winning formula. Republicans have always thought it was important to be for something in terms of defining their party and what they take to voters. That's not what they've done here, and they're paying for it.
So, Congressman Dent, remind me again, over the past 4 years since Donald Trump won, he's managed to lose the White House, lose the House. It appears he's on track to lose the Senate for Republicans. Why do Republicans still this morning think he has the Midas touch and they might pull this stunt on behalf of him?
Well, that's a great debate, Allison. I've been arguing for some time that there are consequences to chaos. And last night's result is just a reflection of that. Donald Trump divided the GOP in Georgia, attacking the Republican governor and Secretary of State mercilessly, saying the election was rigged. As David just said, he suppressed the GOP vote, and now this may have cost Republicans the Senate. This is not shocking what happened last night, and it's going to fall squarely on the president. Why anybody right now would want to carry the president's water in the United States Senate after what happened last night is beyond me. I mean, to placate the president's unhealthy and undemocratic obsession. So I think right now, if you're a Republican going on this little suicide mission today, which will be unsuccessful, why would you be doing this to facilitate a president who lost? This cost Republicans everything. The president lost the election, and every Republican down ballot was reaffirmed across the country who ran for re-election, almost in the House anyway, and in these state legislatures around the country. Trump was the problem. Everybody knows it, except apparently for the folks in the two Senate candidates in Georgia.
David, how will history judge these Republicans who are trying to undermine democracy in broad daylight, to overthrow an election in broad daylight? And how will history judge Vice President Mike Pence, who apparently has told the president he has no power to overthrow the election, but we fully expect to give some kind of, sunny speech that, gushes praise and advances the president's arguments?
Look, if you're Mike Pence, who has a long history in Washington and as a governor, if you are going to enable the disease of Trump, the lies, the attempt to steal an election, to undermine democracy, then history is going to judge you very harshly, and you don't deserve any future in electoral politics. There's no two ways about it. He's vice president of the United States. He has a responsibility to the integrity of that office, to the integrity of himself. What he's been engaged in is a hedge, is a way to tack back and forth to stay in Donald Trump's good favor. That's a decision he's made as an individual.
Of rain in and around Sioux Falls, but you know what? Notice as we do go through time here, some of that snow is trying to make its way a little bit farther to the south. That's what you see in that color switching over to white near Colton. Chester looking at some light snow showers right now. As we do expand our view, Madison, I know I checked that live cam earlier this morning, and they're seeing some snow. And then, of course, into northeastern South Dakota, we've been watching this snow from Aberdeen to Watertown and areas to the east and to the northeast. Snowfall amounts, we took a little off. 1 to 3 Aberdeen, 1 to 3 Sioux Falls. We'll go 1 to 3 Watertown and in Brookings, where we do have these winter weather advisories out for today. Should mention, too, some slick sidewalks, secondary roads that have not been treated. Pay attention to those as you do make your morning commute for this morning. Temperatures, for the most part, holding in the low to middle 30s. Forecast today, we'll go at steady temperatures are falling as we go through the afternoon hours. Northeastern South Dakota, numbers mainly in the low and middle 30s. We'll continue to watch our snow showers during the morning hours. Central and western South Dakota, looking at sunshine in western Keloland. We'll try to bring in periods of sunshine in central South Dakota. Afternoon highs in the 30s and
refused to seat. To participate, they can call 833-946-1543.
Well, employees at about 45 Macy's have been notified their stores will close by the middle of the year. CNBC reports the closures are part of a previously announced plan to shutter 125 locations by 2023. Liquidation sales have already started at some locations. The rest are slated to start later this month. The department store chain did not provide a list of the roughly 45 locations that will close.
Well, we're going to turn back to weather this morning. The winter weather trying to make its way into our region.
Yeah, Scott Egan is live in Sioux Falls tracking road conditions, and he joins us now. Good morning, Scott.
Hey, good morning there, Thor and Vanessa. Things not so bad yet here in the Sioux Falls area, but that doesn't mean street crews are just not preparing for things. They've been out all morning long, salting, sanding those roads, making sure things are safe for everyone on their morning commutes. Joining me here now this morning is Dustin Hanson, the Street Operations Manager here in Sioux Falls. Dustin, thanks for waking up with us this morning. Appreciate you being here with us. So tell me just how you guys have prepared for today's weather moving in and what operations have looked like so far this morning.
Yeah, so for obviously the last couple of days, we've been getting our sander trucks ready for this event. We were kind of preparing for a 2 to 3 inch event. Obviously overnight it's changed and kind of for the better with a little bit of rain. We did kind of salt the roads earlier this morning just because we had a little bit of slush and it was starting to get slick. Now that's kind of turned over to rain, and we've got the temps on our side, and the ground temps are still a little bit warm. We'll continue to monitor those streets, though, throughout the morning and put our plows on if we need to.
Absolutely, and obviously, like you mentioned, things change pretty quickly. If temperatures do drop a little bit into that freezing category, how are you guys going to go and adjust for that?
Yep, so if we get some of that freezing temps, then we'll go out and put some more salt back onto the streets if we do get those colder temps.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, how many plows in the fleet do you have? Obviously, the whole shed here is pretty much empty besides one. How many do you have, and how often do they run throughout the day?
Yep, so that's a good sign. We're out on the streets. We've got 20 emergency routes out there, and we typically try to have 2 to 3 trucks per route. So this event, we probably have 2 out there per route. So we probably have about 45 trucks out there this morning. We do have about 64 of our sanders in our fleet, so a good number.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for giving us an update and joining us this morning, Dustin. And as always, make sure before you leave this morning to call 501 or check that sd501.org to check those recent road conditions, what things are like before you leave the house. And we'll be continuing up north a little bit later this morning to check in on things further up that way. But for now, Thor, Vanessa, back to you in the studio.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Scotty, again, joining us live in Sioux Falls. Better to be prepared for something like this than be rushing out and not being prepared for it.
And if you're heading out this morning, obviously the commute, give yourself maybe a few extra minutes to get to school and work this morning.
All right, let's turn to our morning show question of the day. Before we get to this morning's, though, we'll go back to yesterday's for those of you who did not hear the answer.
38% of as part of getting healthy. The answer, and I agree, this is a tough one. Stop snacking.
And now let's go to today's question. The average
information can learn from what the EPA has done here. I'm thinking
just left the Postal Service and the mail it carries vulnerable to all kinds of contraband, including this deadly fentanyl.
Contacted 6 in 10 contacted by the Democrat groups, whereas only about 5 in 10 were contacted by the Republicans. So it looks like Stacey Abrams and the Democratic get out the vote efforts did a better job getting out the vote.
Yeah, they had a big impact on the outcome of this election. Here's, I think, the 3 biggest impacts, Steve, really quickly. Number one, we probably have to factor in the role that people like Lynn Wood had in telling people not to vote. I don't know what kind of swing that produced in this election, but it certainly caused, I'm sure, some people out there to decline to vote in this election. Number 2, and this is the biggest, it's absolutely true that mail-in balloting with almost a million votes cast through no excuse, mail-in balloting played a massive role in this election, and it perhaps will going forward. Coronavirus affected our families, our businesses, and how we elect politicians in this country. Yep. That is the biggest influence, in my opinion. And lastly, really quickly, Steve, I would say Georgia's been trending purple for some time. This isn't the first election where we've seen Democrats gain power in Georgia. And watch that, because it's not just in Georgia. It will be happening in places like Texas. Florida, we know, has gone back and forth. Purple, red, blue, through time. This is a growing trend and one to watch as we go forward.
Yeah, a lot of Democrats up here in New York are moving south during coronavirus.
Exactly, Ainsley.
All right, thank you so much, Will. Let's bring in Pete Hegseth. He is the Weekend Fox and Friends co-host and our friend. Hey, Pete, what's going on in D.C. today?
Hey, good morning. What's going on in D.C.? What isn't going on in D.C. today? We actually just we just walked into the Save America rally. If you pan over here, that's the stage. We just got let in alongside media. In fact, Griff Jenkins is right here with us, just up the road. There's the Washington Monument, and just further down is Capitol Hill, where the certification electoral college is going to happen today at 1 o'clock. That is going to be contested. The vice president will preside, and ultimately multiple senators and congressmen will be objecting to the certification of multiple states, which will lead to a very public debate that will be broadcast across the country, a debate that a lot of people want to have. And we talked about the exit polls out of Georgia, the voter analysis, that showed that up to 70% of Republicans in Georgia believed the results in November were fraudulent, were not above board. And as a result, that debate is one they want to hear, that they feel is overdue, evidence that has not been sufficiently presented. In addition to that debate, and as a preview to it, the President of the United States will be on that stage at 11 o'clock in about 3.5 hours, joined as well by his son, Don Jr., Eric Trump, multiple representatives, and people who put this the event together, which is Women for Trump. as well. So in the shadow of the White House, with the stage, in the ellipse here in Washington, D.C., it does feel like a constitutional tinderbox. You've got people who view what happened in November very, very differently, fundamentally to their soul. And we're going to talk to attendees here, and it will be reflected in what happens in the streets and the halls of Congress just hours from now, guys.
But Kamala Harris is going to cast that tie-breaking vote. And I have a couple questions. I think this is going to empower progressives in a significant way. Joe Biden is going to have to focus more on what they want, frankly. The filibuster, they're going to have to decide if they want to keep the filibuster in place. There's going to be a lot of pressure to remove that. And then there's also the question still about Biden's relationship with Mitch McConnell. It has been historically a productive one. They have been able to work together. But frankly, when you're in the minority, you got a lot less to lose. And I'm interested to see how McConnell, considering this just dramatic split in the Republican Party, he's going to have to manage, a stable, basically, of presidential candidates who are going to be trying to embrace the Trump base. That's going to be a tricky spot for him to be as well. But bottom line, a lot more of Joe Biden's priorities are going to receive votes on the floor of the Senate if this race plays out the way, at this point, it seems to be playing out.
I think that's the key, is the votes that will actually see the light of day that would not have seen the light of day had Mitch McConnell remained Senate Majority Leader. And of course, there still could be an upset in that second Georgia race. Perhaps John Ossoff won't carry.
Cobb County overnight. This is a heavily Democratic county where Ossoff leads by more than 230,000 votes. The last batch of votes we got from DeKalb skewed toward Ossoff by 98%. So you see where this late counted vote is skewing right now, which is why Democrats think that within a few hours, this race could be called for John Ossoff. Allison.
Okay, John, and we know as soon as there are more votes that come in, you will bring them to us. Thank you very much. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., tensions are building. Pro-Trump protesters clashing with police there overnight. This morning, protesters already lining up across from the White House, where the president will address the crowd in just a few hours. CNN's Boris Sanchez, is live in Washington with more. So what are you seeing at this hour, Boris?
Good morning, Allison. Yeah, an enormous line at the Washington Monument, gathering since before 3 a.m., and waves of supporters for the president are still arriving now. This is President's Park on the ellipse, where President Trump is expected to speak later tonight. Hearing from these folks, a lot of anticipation for what the president is going to say, and a lot of anger as well, and some of that tension boiled over last night. A number of incidents around Washington, D.C., including at Black Lives Matter Plaza, the site of so much violence and drama last summer when social justice protesters encountered law enforcement and things got ugly. They got ugly again last night. It appeared that some irritant was dispersed at one point, pushing lines of police officers, then being pushed back. Remember, at the time, President Trump put out a message of law and order. So far, we've yet to hear that from the president when his own supporters are agitating officers. We should note there is an enormous law enforcement presence all across the city. There is National Guard that has been deployed. There are street closures all around the city, a lot of vigilance over what is happening. The president expected to speak here at 11 a.m., and then shortly after that, at around noon, these marchers are expected to walk all the way down to the Capitol, hoping to essentially overturn the results of the 2020 election. Allison.
Okay, Boris, be careful as things heat up there. So the pandemic hitting grim new levels, another record number of deaths overnight in the U.S. Why can't we vaccinate more Americans?
Our produce standards are more than a label. It's a promise that every fruit on your table was chosen by someone who thinks farmers rule. And so
seen locally on KSFY's MeTV Sioux Falls. MeTV is memorable entertainment television.
Leave it to be coming today.
We're absolutely prepared. We're especially prepared for the Congress doing its job, affirming the Electoral College, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris becoming the next president and vice president of the United States and turning to the page on this Trump era. We, of course, prepare for First Amendment demonstrations all the time in Washington, D.C. Our Metropolitan Police Department is on it. We have the support of our D.C. National Guard. We have support of our neighbors, and we're very prepared to have a peaceful protest.
The president, in a tweet recently, said it will be wild, talking about today's events in Washington, encouraging his supporters to come to town. What is unique about this gathering, and do you expect violence?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that the president himself has incited violence. Other elected officials have incited violence. I will tell you another thing that our residents, I asked them a couple of days ago to stay out of the demonstration areas, that we don't have counter protests. Let people who are looking for confrontation and a fight, and unfortunately we saw some skirmishes between them and the police last night. We had several arrests related to that activity, but not a single one of them was a DC resident, because our residents are staying away, letting them have their protests, but our police are going to make sure that our law is followed. Willie, what I also want to add is just how excited we are about what Georgia voters did and what it means for our democracy and what it especially means for DC residents. We have been talking throughout this process about how important it is that we become the 51st state. And we know now that it's looking like we will have the White House, the House, and fingers crossed that Democrats will win the Senate, and this can become a 100-day priority, a DC state for our next president.
Mayor Bowser, just in light of the arrests and the skirmishes that you were just reporting there, and are there any in your contact with the National Guard and DC Police credible threats? And what's your best advice for DC residents today, especially given the fact that we're in a pandemic?
Well, I've said throughout Mika, when I stood up our Emergency Operations Center, our coordination between our chief of police, our neighboring chiefs, and I called up the DC National Guard with the support of the Secretary of the Army and my and our advice to our residents was not to fight with these folks who came here looking for a fight. Our police department also made a very significant arrest in the leader of the so-called Proud Boys, who when the last time he was in town, he defaced or led or encouraged the defacement of 2 African-American churches in our city by destroying their Black Lives Matter signs. He was arrested when he entered the district, and he also had illegal firearm materials on his person. And he has had his first appearance in court and has been barred from the district. So we are doing everything possible that we can to keep our residents safe, our businesses safe, but of course allow for people to exercise their First Amendment rights, no matter what their viewpoints are.
But that is kind of different than what people are talking about here, which is saying that they would like people to pay attention to elections going forward, that this is a very serious issue. And again, it's not just about this election, it's not just about this year. A lot of the people who are saying that this is something that you can't do spent the last 4 years, day in and day out, undermining the president, not permitting a peaceful transfer of power to President Trump, pushing this Russia hoax that everybody knew was wrong. They intentionally lied about it. And so for people to say now, you can't do anything or else it's improper, after doing that for 4 years, is infuriating to people who suffered through that.
Before you go, I know we hadn't talked about talking to you about this, but I am curious your analysis of what went haywire for the Republicans, it appears, in Georgia.
Well, I think that when you have a loss like this, you can point fingers in a number of directions, and people are going to do that where they're blaming each other. Failure has 1,000 fathers. But I think it's interesting that the Republican establishment really felt that they were going to win this, and they kept pointing to their voter turnout efforts. And it reminded me a bit of what happened in 2012 with Mitt Romney when they said, we've got that ORCA system. I don't know if you remember that, where they said our voter turnout will be great. And it turned out not to be so great. I don't think there's any substitute. You can have these consultant-led campaigns campaigns with a lot of money. There's simply no substitute to having candidates who people are excited to get out and vote for. And I think that was lacking here. And I think the Republican Party needs to focus more on quality candidates and good policy ideas and less on spending a lot of money on ads or consultant-focused races.
Well, you look at the numbers and the turnout, it does appear that the Democrats were more excited about their candidates because they showed up in epic numbers from what we've seen so far. Although the Ossoff-Purdue race has not yet been called because it's too close to call. All right, Molly, thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.
All right. Meanwhile, DeRoy Murdoch joins us next on the potential power shift in...
Or just more electrifying. Comfort. Ways to get moving in our clean and
accused of killing 2 people during protests here last summer. Kyle Rittenhouse was arraigned in court. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. Guys?
All right, Alex. Okay, Alex, thanks very much. Coming up next, new details on Kim and Kanye. Fierce divorce is on the table after a tough year for the Hollywood couple. We're going to have the latest on that.
Also help. Sun solar insulation does get through, even though it's cloudy and, we're pretty far north, so there's not a lot. But it will help, at least on, I think, the majorly traveled roadways like the interstate. So watching for that today. Omaha, though, you do get into snow. And once that sun sets later on this afternoon, we are going to be looking, I think, for some slippery spots, especially untreated surfaces.
For this, and so we're going to have to take a discount, later on.
So, caller, in the relation of the electoral college vote, can you relate your question or comment to that today? Since that's what we have our guest in. Yeah, go ahead.
I am. I'm getting to it.
Go ahead.
So we have this big concern. So our frustration is, if in fact there has been improprieties in the electoral college vote, it's not going to fix that. Because nobody wants to look at the evidence. So let's talk about truth. Evidence in law gets us to that truth. Let's make sure that we look at that truth before we vote.
Okay. Okay, that's Kevin. Go ahead, Mr. Fortier.
Well, look, I do think there are people who are very concerned about how the election was run, especially in certain states. And I think that's always true to some extent, but there are particular concerns this time. Generally speaking, those worries about the election should be resolved at the state process, with the state's election, with the recounts, with perhaps challenges in the state courts. And that culminates in a state certification of the election, a decision that this is the winner in this state, and an appointment of electors in the Electoral College. Again, there may be many people who have disagreed with some of those decisions that led to that certification. There may be certainly changes that you'd propose in how we would run elections in states. And states do very different things. Maybe even some injustices that they feel they can resolve for future elections. But I think once we got to the point of finalizing those state returns, however we got there, that was the state's final decision as to who was elected president in that state this time, and led to the appointment of the electors. Congress has a very hard time going behind those results, and probably shouldn't really go behind those results too much. Again, today is mostly considering what are these slates of electors, are they properly given, and they'll have votes about it if there are objections. But primarily that resolution of all those details of whether we should have had absentee voting or deadlines, or whether courts made correct decisions or not, or the votes were counted properly. There was a process for resolving that went on from November to up to the December 14th counting or casting of votes by the electors. Today is a little more general, looking at those electoral votes cast, not so much that process. There's not really a room for the Congress to undo those. They can make big objections and throw out something they find to be particularly not regularly given, but they can't go back and add new electors. They can't rerun the election. They can't litigate all of those issues that were litigated in the lead up to the certification of the election in the states.
Mr. Ford?
The vaccines, and even leaving the disappointing rollout aside,
that was never going to sort of have an immediate impact on these trajectories of these numbers. We knew that going in. The problem is, I think what has happened is that because there's been, I think, a good and an expected celebration around the vaccines. I mean, it has been a worthy thing that has really been done here scientifically. But I think in some ways it's also led to this whiplash where, okay, the vaccines are here, we can sort of put this thing in the rearview mirror, and instead of going into some of the mitigation measures that should be done in some of these states in responding to these numbers, people are just sort of saying, maybe we can just sort of power through this and see what happens. And we're moving now from what were sort of moderate case scenarios to worst case scenarios. As bad as the numbers are now in terms of newly infected people every day, John, I know you've seen these trends, but 1 million people potentially plus a day could potentially be getting infected. And if you start to do the math on that, that's 5,000 plus people dying a day as a result of that. So what we're doing wrong is the same thing that we've been doing wrong. We're not doing the basics. We like the home runs, we like the touchdowns, but we're not leaning into the basic things that would make such a big impact on this pandemic much more quickly.
Here's where the numbers are right now in terms of the vaccines. Doses distributed to the states, 17 million. Doses administered to Americans, 4.8 million. Sanjay, as you know, as we've discussed, we were promised it would be more than 20 million Americans who would be vaccinated by now. Now that we know there was no national plan, now that we know this was outsourced all to the states and everybody had to fend for themselves in the usual kind of survival of the fittest way that we've become accustomed to with this, where did they ever come up with the 20 million number? Was that just like out of a hat? I mean, why did we believe that 20 million Americans were going to be vaccinated by now?
Well, it all came because that was all based on what they thought they would have available in terms of the vaccine. I mean, that was it, Allison. The idea that they would create this much vaccine was critical and important, but that the fact that it would then equate to that number of people becoming vaccinated, there was a lot of missteps there, pretty clearly. The biggest one is the one you mentioned, the handoff from the feds to the states seems to be the biggest one. And even, in the couple of weeks before these authorizations came about, you remember from the FDA and then from the CDC, we kept sort of waiting for the plan. Okay, we know who should get it first, we know what the availability is going to be like, but how is it actually going to work? And what we're seeing is a very sort of scattershot approach across the country. Even within states, one county may be distributing very differently than another county, and that's a real problem. It's been a very uneven process. What has struck me is that, okay, now that we've seen this disappointing rollout, what are we going to do about it? It's obviously not working the way we wanted. Do we just say we hope that it gets better, or do we start to be more proactive? And I don't really see these new plans being laid out by the current sort of administration. This is the biggest public health emergency of our lifetime. What you are hearing, maybe possibly from the incoming administration, we will see, is things like football stadiums and high school gyms being turned into these vaccination centers, incorporating the military, the National Guard, FEMA. That's the federal response that we probably need to be seeing to this public health emergency.
People need to get these shots soon. Sanjay, thanks so much for being with us.
I do.
Manufacturing plant.
Oh, Tesla's associate.
Well, can you act like any emergency powers to say, no, we're not going to count votes today. We're going to stay in office until this pandemic is gone through, especially since the Wall Street Journal actually put forth that the people responsible said, hey, there was an accident. So
okay, we'll leave it there, and we'll let our guests respond to that.
I don't believe this.
America deserved an honest election. This is what they got. Suitcases of ballots added in secret in Georgia. Dead people voting in Wisconsin. A money for vote scheme in Nevada. Poll watchers denied access in Pennsylvania. Faulty ballot drop boxes. And clerks facing felony charges in Michigan. The evidence is overwhelming.
folks that were there observing the many people that were counting the ballots and trying to match up who people voted for. Some of them were a few feet away, some were told to go back, and then they pushed the machines to the other side of the room so they couldn't see. And then you hear about, you mentioned the affidavits, hundreds and hundreds of affidavits that were signed.
Absolutely.
If you sign one of those and you're lying, you go to prison.
Absolutely right, absolutely. And there are about 202,000 more ballots than there are actual voters who voted in
Right,
Pennsylvania,
right.
according to 19 different members of the Georgia State Senate.
Right. Thanks so much, DeRoy.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Coming up, live coverage of the Save America rally in D.C. with our own Pete Hegseth. But first, let's check in with Sandra Smith for what's coming up at the top of the hour. Hey, Sandra.
Ainsley, good morning to you. Two big stories we're watching this morning. Georgia's Senate results still rolling in. Democrat Raphael Warnock has defeated Kelly Loeffler. The Purdue-Ossoff race still too close to call at this hour. Plus, rallies happening in Washington today with President Trump set to speak at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We will have that for you live. And hours later, Congress is set to hold a joint session to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election. Rachel Campos Duffy, Ben Domenech, Chris Wallace, Howie Kurtz, and more will be joining Bill Hemmer and me live. Top of the hour. See you then.
Real people really do.
In the United States Senate, and what words of assurance do you have for the American people as we go into this tumultuous day?
Well, I may be wishing for more than is possible, but I hope that Vice President Pence will join those Republicans who will stand with the Democrats today to defend the votes of the American people across this nation in choosing Joe Biden as president. If Vice President Pence will join them, we can move on respecting the will of the American people and respecting this Constitution.
Senator Durbin, it's Willie Geist. Good to see you this morning. You've been in that body for a long time. You know some of the senators pretty well who are planning to object to today. Have you spoken to any of them? Do they carry any of this burden of history that their names will be permanently etched into the record as people who tried to overturn a presidential election based on nothing?
I really don't. I haven't spoken to them, and I don't know what they're thinking. But I hope that there'll be a moment of reflection before if we should deliberate today about counting the electoral votes. This is a momentous moment in history, and I hope that those fellow senators will realize that they don't want to be on the wrong side of history. They want to respect the American people. Listen, I've seen elections 4 years ago, for example, where I didn't like the outcome at all with Donald Trump's victory, but I respected the fact the American people made that decision, giving him the same number of electoral votes that Joe Biden has today. I hope my colleagues will reflect on that as they make their final decisions.
And as you say, we'll see what Vice President Pence does as well. Help us look ahead. 2 weeks from today, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be sworn in. The 46th president of the United States will take office. And then what? There's been so much fight over Donald Trump, his 4 years, and so much fight since the election about the outcome. Joe Biden sits in the office. He may have a 50-50 split in the Senate with his vice president casting tie-breaking votes. What does Washington look like now post-Donald Trump?
Well, it certainly is a dramatic change from where we've been over the last 4 years, and I think the voters have made it clear they wanted that change. By a margin of 7 million votes in the presidential race, the contests in more than 57 court cases that were turned away. It is time for us to turn this page of history and to serve the American people. We are in the midst of a deadly pandemic that is our highest priority, and it has to really make our decisions that much more serious as we reflect on what it means to so many families across America. They are expecting us to rise to the challenge. That is exactly why we're here. We have a chance now with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to do that.
Senator Mike Barnicle has a question for you. Mike?
Senator, in a 50-50 Senate, how do the chairmanships work?
The chairmanships will go to the majority, which will be, we hope, without Ossoff's victory, a Democratic majority, the tie broken by Kamala Harris as the presiding officer over the United States Senate. I've been through this before. When Jim Jeffords switched parties from Republican to Democrat, there was a tie in the Senate. The chairmanship went to the majority party. In this case, it will be the Democrats with John Ossoff's victory.
Senator Dick Durbin, thank you very much. We appreciate your coming on this morning. We have a few
cause supporters that we're seeing in Washington, and you were
with just 2 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I just seeing what I've seen here in Arizona, when the governor signed off on the election certification, which he's statutorily required to do, those people turned on him. They're going to do the same thing with Mike Pence.
It's interesting because you talk about Arizona, the Arizona GOP, and you're a Democrat. So I think obviously people need to take that into account when I ask you your opinions on the Arizona Republican Party. But there is a statement that they put out on New Year's Day that said, as the sun sets on 2020, remember that we're never going back to the party of Romney, Flake, and McCain. I mean, they are proudly saying that the Republican Party is now and forever will be one for the working man and woman, God bless. And they frequently put up pictures that suggest that they're willing to fight violently for Donald Trump.
Yeah, again, very concerning. As a partisan Democrat, I say go for it. But in my role as Secretary of State, I think their actions are continuing to be very dangerous to our democracy.
You talk about as a partisan Democrat, what role do you think that the president had in Georgia, where one Democrat has already been declared the winner in the Senate races there, and another Democrat is on the precipice of perhaps taking a second Senate seat?
Well, I think perhaps it's a bad idea to tell your voters that the election's rigged. I don't think that worked out very well for him. But bottom line, I think from my vantage point, Democrats out-organized on the ground, and all of this election, post-election sort of things that we've been seeing, I think played into how voters voted yesterday and leading up to yesterday.
Yeah. Look, Joe Biden won in November. He won when they recounted the votes. Democrats, it looks like, won both seats in the Georgia races yesterday, and that's just the fact, and people are going to have to live with it. Madam Secretary, thanks so much for being with us. Please stay safe.
So get the leaf for a star-studded event.
Oh my God, I can't even believe I'm here.
That will leave you spinning.
Streets. To expedite entry, the following items will not be allowed in: backpacks, chairs, flagpoles. Please leave them behind as you prepare for security screenings. Again, to expedite entry, the following items will not be allowed in: backpacks, chairs, flagpoles. Please leave them behind so we can get everyone through security. Thank you.
And we're here to make those walks easy. From tasty treats on the go
at the certification is a pathetic dwindling end to his rise. It's over, and that's what we will see today in Washington, D.C. That does it for us this morning. Stephanie Rule picks up the coverage after a final quick break.
Is turning out to be kind of a sloppy day out there with the rain snow combo for some of us. We're looking at temperatures 35 Sioux Falls. That's interesting because it's a little harder for all that snow to stick to the ground, even though it is falling at times. 34 now Brookings, same thing in Aberdeen. So
because as soon as someone sees her, they obviously see both. As for women in baseball, she's joining a handful of coaches, the first hire just last year, and she told me she looks forward to the day when hirings like theirs don't make headlines. Gail, they are just the norm.
Wow. Oh, I love everything about her in this story. Thank you, Dana. I mean, think about that, guys. 8 jobs, 2 degrees. You go, Bianca.
Dual business law degree. That is, that's impressive. I love that her parents, when she was in a moment where she wasn't sure what she was going to do, said, no, stick with this.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know what I'm going to do?
Advice. Yeah.
I'm going to send her a ring light today because something tells me she's going to be doing a lot of interviews. And it was hard not to see her whole face. I want to see your whole face, Bianca, because you look fantastic. I'm going to send that out today. Congrats, congrats. I had how hundreds of prison inmates work together to keep a high school student on track, you could say. But first, at 8:38, 8:39, exactly. I just love when that happens. It's a goofy thing, I know. Time to check your local weather.
Good morning, Ketherland. I'm meteorologist Brian Karstens. Wintry mix out there today. So an advisory in a narrow corridor from near Aberdeen down through Huron, Madison, Sioux Falls, and an extension in extreme northwest Iowa. So the bottom line is that slushy coating of snow expected with a mixed bag of rain and sleet a little bit as well. Folks in the west, though, you're out of the...
So clean organic fruits and vegetables delivered to your door means you don't have to think about lunch or dinner or breakfast. Get started today at dailyharvest.com.
Through the years, you guide and protect.
Together or read a relationship book and then talk about it. It's like an assignment for yourself as a couple.
Men love that when you're like,
Yeah.
let's see this relationship. They look
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you mean like as a friend or?
And now they're just going to do anything they can do to get it turned around and make it look like it was fake. And it's just creating a great divide in our state, in our country. I mean.
Okay. By the way, if you go to the editorial pages of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, they highlight the actions, potential actions of today of its senator, Ron Johnson. The editors write in part, Johnson's stunt will do harm to our democracy. What precedent is being set here? What happens the next time either party loses the presidency narrowly while controlling both houses of Congress? Will those politicians do what Johnson and his hyper-partisan mob are doing? Will they make up lies about the election, cry voter fraud, complain about voting machines, election officials, and any other ghosts they can conjure? Again, that's from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, their editorial for today. Rosario in Massachusetts, Democrats line.
Congress, will those politicians do it?
Yes, hello.
Caller, the first thing you're going to need to do is turn down that television.
How you doing, sir? Good morning.
Yeah, the first thing you're going to need to do is turn down your television, sir.
It's up. The television's up.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'm calling about the vote today in Congress. Okay? All Pence needs to do is go over there and he's just like the referee in the impeachment. He has no say in nothing. President Trump wants to create a civil war against the people. He's doing anything to stay out of jail. 400,000 Americans have died.
And do you think that Vice President Pence is going to go beyond his role today?
If he does, he's just as bad as Trump. And then they're going to have really big problems in Washington.
Okay.
If they want to create a civil war, tell them we are ready to fight for our independence. This is not Russia. We're in the United States of America.
Okay, that's Rosario there giving us a call again. A lot going on today. If you were to go outside of the Capitol, there is a rally taking place, the Rally to Save America. It's sponsored by supporters of President Trump. The president expected to appear later on today. If we can, we'll dip into a little bit of the rally.
Because he doesn't owe anyone for getting him here, because you put him right here in the White House, not once, but twice. We were all there through this 2020 election cycle. We've seen these crowds, unlike, Joe Biden and his 6 hula hoops. The guy couldn't even get 1,000 views online, but we're supposed to believe that he had more votes than Barack Obama. I mean, come on, nobody really believes this crap. But hey, there's something going on at the Capitol today. And I don't think they can hear you. This movement started over a decade ago. Do I have any Tea Party people in the house?
Again, just a flavor of what you can see happening on C-SPAN 2 there if you want to follow along. Katrina Pearson, who served as a spokesperson from the 2016 campaign for President Trump, speaking right now. Again, a slate of speakers expected to go throughout the day and into the morning. The president expected to speak about 11 o'clock today. Nelson in Colorado Springs, Democrats line. Hello, go ahead.
But I think those politicians down there, the Republican politicians down there, have forgotten what the Tea Party movement did back then. See, they forgot that Americans know their rights. Americans will stand up for themselves and protect their rights, and they will demand that the politicians that we elect uphold those rights, or we will go after them. And so you better believe, the next 2 years, we are watching today. We are taking names today. And I don't know, are you guys gonna forget? Because today, moving forward, we have hundreds of days for them to hear from us, for them to see us, and for them to work on replacing them one by one if we have to. This president has sacrificed everything for this country and has asked for nothing in return.
Today, we had a beautiful new bathroom.
For a limited time, be one of the... We're following several new coronavirus developments at this hour. The United States hitting another very dark milestone, surpassing 21 million cases. The latest million added in just the last 5 days. To date, more than 350,000 Americans have lost their lives. 3,300 people died on Tuesday alone. And there were more than 232,000 new cases yesterday. And hospitalizations are hitting another new record. Don't let anyone tell you this is just the flu. Right now, more than 131,000 people are in the hospital across this country suffering from the virus. I want to go live to Erin McLaughlin in Los Angeles, California, where one hospital has declared it is going into crisis standard of care. Erin, what does that even mean?
Essentially means rationing care. It means healthcare workers deciding who gets the care and who doesn't. It means they're being forced to make decisions that, quote, pose a significant risk to their patients. Now, the hospital in question says that they are not at the point yet of having to ration care, of having to do that, but they said that they are definitely on that current trajectory. I've been speaking to doctors at hospitals across Los Angeles as well. They say that they believe they are days away from that nightmare. The state putting out an edict just this week that cancels all elective surgeries for areas where there is 0% ICU capacity available. That includes Los Angeles County. This is a serious crisis. The ambulance services are now conserving oxygen. They're also being told not to transport patients deemed very unlikely to survive. I was speaking to one emergency room doctor who says these measures are concerning but necessary. Take a listen.
Giving a paramedic that authority is very concerning because they don't have the background and experience. However, right now, it is what we must do in order to save the majority.
Health officials are warning people here in LA County that if they leave their homes, they are at risk of contracting the virus. 1 out of 5 being tested currently tests COVID positive. Stephanie.
Erin, thank you so much. Coming up next, we're going to go back to Capitol Hill for what is expected to be a showdown as Congress counts Joe Biden's Electoral College win. Congresswoman and newly reappointed member of the Oversight and Reform Committee, Katie Porter, joins us live.
Lactate is 100% real milk, just without the lactose, so you can enjoy it even if you're sensitive. Yet some people say lactate isn't real.
Reading, but reporting the news. It means putting the most experienced journalists on the biggest stories. KELOLAND News is reporting, no matter which desk you sit behind. KELOLAND TV, your home for news.
How to change.
All of this, then they're going to go state by state. Essentially, they'll go through 2 states, and then they'll get to the state of Arizona. At that point, we expect the first objection, and this is really when the circus will begin. We expect that Senator Ted Cruz will raise that objection with a House member. At that point, the 2 chambers will go back and debate this separately for up to 2 hours. Then they all have to vote on whether or not to uphold this objection. We know that each of these objections are going to go down, but essentially, this could take upwards of 4 or 5 hours, given the fact that it's going to take the House of Representatives a long time to vote, because they're dealing with the fact that we are still in a pandemic up here on Capitol Hill. There are concerns about safety. They're going to be voting in groups. Then there will be a joint session once again. They're going to continue to go through these states. We expect other objections after Arizona. That's the state of Pennsylvania, of course, and potentially the state of Georgia from Kelly Loeffler, who again lost last night in her re-election campaign. So a lot of drama coming on Capitol Hill. At the end of the day, and this is very important, Joe Biden is still going to be the next president of the United States. How painful this is going to be for the Republican Party, that's really a question of how many objections they have to get through. There could always be more. We do know that House members are prepared to raise 6, but they have to have a senator sign on. Right now, we know only 3 states where that is the case. Anderson and Aaron?
All right, Lauren, thank you.
Vice President Pence now in the tightest of tight spots ahead of today's proceedings on Capitol Hill. President Trump firing off tweets overnight urging Pence to reject the Electoral College vote, saying he'll, quote, win the presidency if Pence comes through for us. In truth, the Vice President's role overseeing the count is largely ceremonial. Pence reportedly told the President as much when they met yesterday. I'm joined now by Olivia Troy, former Homeland Security Counterterrorism and Coronavirus Response Advisor to Vice President Pence. So, Olivia, the President clearly sees Mike Pence as, one more, lever he can try to manipulate to get what he wants. The Vice President, meanwhile, has, essentially walked a tightrope on this issue up to now. How do you think he'll handle today's proceedings?
Well, first, thanks for having me, Anderson. I think that the Vice President is in a very difficult situation, an impossible spot. And he's been in this situation before, but just not in front of the public eye to this extent, so to speak. So I think he will be very measured. I think you'll see the Pence sit. We've seen sort of walk the fine line of trying to appease his boss, which is Donald Trump, but also trying to appease the more moderate side of the Republican Party. And I think what will determine is Mike Pence's determination of what 2024 looks like, to be honest. Is it the Trump base of the party for his future, or is it the more moderates? And right now what we're seeing is there is a wave of Trumpism in the party that doesn't seem to be fading.
One White House official calls it shameful what President Trump is doing to Pence right now. How would you describe it?
It's deplorable. You have someone who has been very loyal. He's one of his most loyal soldiers. He's been there through thick and thin for the past 4 years. He has never been outspoken against the president. But Donald Trump, the way he operates is he is a bully. And when he doesn't get his way and he starts to, lose grasp of power, he is going to push those closest around him, and he will be the loudest voice in the room, and he will push conspiracies that are completely false and try to bully and intimidate those around him into doing his bidding. But today, the Vice President doesn't have the power to do the things that Donald Trump is proclaiming, and I hope that he will publicly state this and counter this sort of conspiracy theories that the president is spreading, because I think they're very detrimental to our country.
Do you expect Pence to try to run for president in 2024?
Absolutely. I really do.
So that's got to be the calculus. I mean, as you said, it's trying to figure out there's really not anything he can do today based on what his constitutional role is, which is really a ceremonial role. He's essentially, opening the envelopes like somebody at the Academy Awards and announcing who the winner is.
That's correct, and I think the Vice President has a big choice to make today. I mean, his choices, you stand by the Constitution and you stand for the ideals of what our country has been founded on, and you stand for the integrity of our elections. And if you stand for anything but that, I think that you are defining yourself and your legacy completely for 2024 and what movement you're attaching yourself to.
Yeah,
That's the bottom line.
Yeah, Olivia Troy, fascinating. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And as president,
matters how you wear it.
If you're not wearing it appropriately, meaning over the mouth and the nose, it's really not giving you a lot of benefit.
What everyone agrees on is that COVID is a difficult adversary.
Rank COVID as an opponent.
It's the toughest, and you don't want to joke about this at all. People are dying, can't prepare for it, you really can't fight it.
Wow. And Ann, you know, the NBA also appears to be adding mask requirements. What can you tell us about that?
Carson, they sent out a memo this week reminding players that if they are dressed for a game and on the bench, they must wear a mask until they get in the game. When they come out of the game, they are strongly urged but not required to put that mask back on, and everything resets at halftime.
Interesting. I'll be interested to watch how that progresses and see if those requirements get a little more strict. Ann, thank you so much. Appreciate
all
it.
right, coming up, guys.
It's awfully hard for them.
Yeah, it is. Coming up on Hoda and Jenna, we've got Ted Danson. We got Holly Hunter, the stars of a new sitcom with Tina.
Up to the races. Daniel in Tennessee, Democrats line.
Good morning, Pedro. Thanks for taking my call. I didn't really have much time to think about what I was going to say this morning, but it needs to be said, and that is the Washington Journal is pretty much a national treasure. I mean, you and your fellow moderators have really saved this country. I mean, you've got Fox News, Newsmax, One America, brainwashing millions of Americans on a daily basis. And I so enjoy listening to the American people call in every morning, because this is what's really happening. There's no spin from these people. This is how they really feel. And if it wasn't for you and Steve, they need to be brought back. John McCardle and Paul and Peter and Greta, bless her heart, and Jesse does such an excellent job on the weekends. I mean, if it wasn't for you guys, the election might have went the other way.
Well, we don't sway the election one way or the other, Daniel, only because as far as presenting information and having guests on to talk about various issues, we strive for, presenting many multi-sided facets of an issue. But you're right in the sense that calls are the main feature of this program, and appreciate you noting that and the work of my fellow colleagues here. We try, to get 60 plus calls in a program every day, and so that gives, like you said, the chance for people who are calling in and give their opinions on certain things, the ability to do so. We appreciate you watching and supporting us. Michael in Illinois.
Silence us. Facebook has shut us down.